All right, did you want to get started, Matthew? Or do you want to give people a few more minutes?
We've got how many in the room?
23 so far.
23. Well, let's go for 5 after.
Okay.
Cindy said her word for the day is hungry, so we can assume that people are either not finished with lunch yet, and that's why they're not here yet, because they too were hungry.
I am forever feeling that way, so I understand.
Okay, then. I'm cool to start. My word of the day will probably be apologetic because no matter what time of day I have some kind of meeting or webinar, my dog decides this is the time to go to sleep and begin snoring. So if you do hear that in the background, I am sorry. But either way, I am so glad that you all are here. Happy Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It is by no accident that we've launched this award right now. What better time to discuss this very important issue than when we should be having this conversation nationwide? So we're really grateful that you took the time. And as we see people trickle in, if this is a reflection of the kind of response we're going to get just with the types of programs and projects we get, because there's so many people here, I'm excited about that. You never know when you put out an invitation for something if anyone sees it, if they care, and if they respond. So you all showing up gives us some fantastic something to anticipate. So we are grateful for that. My name is Matthew White, and I welcome you to this info session. As the title says, this is an information session about the project and application. But more importantly, we want to invite you to understand the why behind this work and to demonstrate how you might want to lead your own projects through the lens of why it really matters. It is imperative that DV victims are aware of their options when seeking safety, especially as they relate to access to firearms present in the relationship, the home, or the extended family. This includes understanding the range of restraining orders available to them and the protections provided to remove firearms from the abusive person. Among the available restraining orders are the Domestic Violence Restraining Order, DVRO, which many of you may already be familiar with, and the Gun Violence Restraining Order. GVROs do not address protections for DV, and DVROs do address the removal of firearms. There is delineation there. Knowledge is power. And so we are here to empower you with the information you need to apply for funding to launch your own outreach campaign that addresses safety measures for DV victims. I am Matthew White. I am your project director, and my role is to be your voice of advocacy and support in this ongoing conversation of gun violence and domestic violence fatalities. Rocky, do you care to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Rocky Jackson, and I am the community analyst for this project. So my main role is to help support, obviously, with the award process, but then also supporting with some technical assistance and coaching after awards are given. And so we'll talk more about kind of what those next steps are later, but we are very happy to have you here, and I'm excited to be able to help Matthew spearhead this project.
We're gonna be so great. I can't see the room. Is Elise here?
I do not see her in here.
That's okay. On behalf of our executive director, Elise, thank you for being here. This is going to be a fantastic time. It's going to be a fantastic project. Let's go ahead and move to our agenda. We'll cover an intersection of guns and domestic violence, and then we'll narrow that down to what's happening in our state. We'll discuss policies to protect victims, and obviously that's the DVRO and GVRO and the differences between those two. We'll further narrow our focus and look at specific communities and how they are impacted by gun violence. We'll discuss the award application, some application questions. We'll go through each of those with you and discuss some challenges that might be very obvious to some of you and might be brand new to the rest. But either way, we want to address those elephants in the room. Right, the intersection between guns and domestic violence. As I said, I want to start broad and introduce the pretty indelible intersection between guns and domestic violence. With this whole presentation, we're going to start this way and move inward because we want you to get the full breadth of what's happening. Guns increase lethality in domestic violence situations. That's a given. Now, you might also know nearly half of all women killed in the United States are murdered by a current or former intimate partner. Not so much a given, but you may not be as surprised by that. What's surprising to us is that women are 5 times more likely to be murdered by an abusive partner when the abuser has access to a gun. We'll expand on these facts in a moment. But first, let's look at how California in particular presents its relationship with guns and DV. In 2019, there were 90 reported homicides in California where the contributing circumstance was a DV argument. Between 2010 and 2019, in that 9-year period, there were at least 1,100 reported homicides where the contributing circumstance was domestic violence. And in 2019, there were nearly 3,000 gun deaths in California. In the work that we do, we all know that we only know what is reported. And in this new era where we're discussing GVROs and the relationship between DV and gun violence, we're looking at these numbers, creating the best correlation that we can so we can paint the best picture for ourselves. To look at policies to protect DV victims, we have policies in place to protect our victims and survivors. We've got our prohibiting people who are convicted of misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence from purchasing firearms. There's the expanding of the definition of misdemeanor crime of DV to include stalking. There's the removal of firearms provision. All of these things are fantastic that we have here in the state. We're fortunate in California to have specific language and resources that address the nuances of domestic violence. Everything from the recent boyfriend loophole to the financial and credit and housing protections that our policy staff has worked really hard to advocate for, and even the language that gives victims space to protect their pets while fleeing violence. Some states are still struggling with definitions, and that gives, of course, victims not much to hope for. It leaves them at a loss. In California, we have some protections that show up in the form of the gun violence restraining order and the domestic violence restraining order. How do those differ, you may ask? The GVRO, civil order that temporarily prohibits individuals at risk of harming themselves or others from purchasing and possessing firearms. These offer only one type of protection and do not offer any relief from abuse. Under California law enforcement, family members, and household members are authorized to petition for a GVRO. It is separate from anything having to do with domestic violence. We've got DVROs for that. The DVRO gives survivors of DV a mechanism to protect themselves from further abuse. It can offer multiple types of provisions, including but certainly not limited to no contact orders, stay away provisions, move out orders, demands for counseling, and firearm provisions, as we discussed. It is important to understand that misinformation about these orders can lead to terminal consequences. I'll give you an example. A victim may not be ready to file a DV restraining order for a myriad of reasons, but her mother might file for a GVRO because she knows there are guns in the home. It may not stop the abuse, but it might stop a homicide. This is why we must be strategic and equitable in how we inform our communities. Your outreach programs will do exactly that. I'm going to continue to narrow the focus down into why the partnership has adopted this project. We started this discussion with a broad pitch about the intersection of domestic violence and guns. Let's take it further. Most intimate partner homicides are committed with the use of a firearm. An abuser's access to a firearm increases the risk of femicide by 1,000%. I don't know anything that increases by 1,000%. 35% of those women killed by men are killed by intimate partners with guns. 59% of mass shootings between 2014 and 2019 were related to DV, and 60% of those mass shootings, the shooter had a history of domestic violence. Between 2003 and 2014, nearly 60% of Black adult female homicide victims were murdered with the use of a firearm. Homicides in rural communities are 3 times as likely to involve an intimate partner than in larger cities. So the skin you're in matters as much as your zip code when it comes to unpacking gun violence. Those of you who are coming in from a rural community might know this already. Over 25% of women in small, rural, and isolated areas live more than 40 miles from the closest program, as opposed to 1%, less than 1% of women in urban areas that just have more access. I'm not a huge fan of discussing statistics because they tend to remove context. No one likes to be referred to as one of something or more likely to do this because of that. But these stats paint a picture of where we are in time and can give us a roadmap of how to respond because of patterns that we see. One particular theme that's obvious to us is the idea of access. Clearly, we're not the only ones who've noticed these numbers. Rocky, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, thank you. So the American Medical Association declared gun violence to be a national public health crisis and one that disproportionately harms Black and Hispanic communities. The US Census Bureau projected that by 2050, 50% of domestic violence rates will victimize underserved populations. So when we think of underserved populations, this may not just be Black and brown people, but LGBTQ, individuals that are disabled, people experiencing homelessness. So there are a lot of populations that can be impacted by domestic violence. So as we discussed, there are systems in place to protect these potential victims. State laws requiring abusers prohibited from possessing firearms to relinquish their firearms are associated with 12% decrease in intimate partner homicide. So the knowledge about the access and the protective measures can radically save lives, particularly in those rural and culturally specific communities. So we see the importance here, not just about understanding what those are and being able to be aware, but accessing and petitioning for those. So we like these odds, and we believe that we can save more lives if only access were increased and knowledge was within reach for those particular populations. And so this brings us to the work that we're going to talk about today and the potential funding that will be out there for this particular program. So Cal OES stands with the partnership in our mission to support Black, brown, and rural communities and ensure access to safety systems. So thinking of that, right, bringing us to why you're all here today, we are inviting everyone to join us by building outreach campaigns across the state to increase survivors' access to these safety measures that Matthew talked about earlier. So the Office of Emergency Services is supplying those funds for domestic violence service providers of our state to apply for funding to design and implement a GVRO, community awareness and education program and campaign. So all of you that are on this call may be potentially some of those subgrantees that will get that funding. And it's important that we're really centering around the GVRO lens. And that our primary populations, we're really looking at those underserved populations that we discussed earlier. So if you're here with us today, you obviously got the invitation and we're excited to have you. Like Matthew brought up, we will have more resources for you to look back at if you missed any part that we've talked about so far, including the recording of this presentation. And so when we think about organizing the field, really the purpose of this project in particular is to inform domestic violence survivors and advocates of the availability of the GVRO and how to petition for one. The information will be disseminated through an outreach campaign, and that can look like a variety of different approaches, but this could include marketing, education, and training, and we want that to be tailored towards domestic violence survivors, including those most marginalized. So I'll pass it over to Matthew to discuss a little bit more in detail what those grant will look like.
That's a really big ask of you, and we are unapologetic about it because we know you can do it. Individual award amounts will not exceed $100,000. This is a 1 year award. If there's more, we will find out later on after the year, but for now, this is $100,000 for 1 year of activity. Please ask for what you need. If you don't need 100,000, you don't have to ask for it, but your application asks for a budget, so be real about your intentions. When the partnership has received award funds from Cali OES, we'll reach out to you directly and we'll begin processing those payments. Grantees will be required, as with any grant, to submit any invoices along with backup documentation, receipts, time cards, all that at the end of the grant period. After awards are distributed, you'll receive more information about what to submit, how often, fiscal needs. For now, we want to focus on the programmatic side of things. And we do intend to have monthly check-in sessions and information sessions for you to not just hear about GVROs and news that we feel is relevant to you and our community, but for you to share successes with each other and to check in and see what's working, what's not, and how do we continue to lean on each other for support. We're looking at the actual application now. I think there was a question already about the budget section of the application. I think there was a glitch there and how much you can request. Just enter that in with, I think there's a spot also where you can enter in how much you're requesting with your budget. We're aware of that, so feel free to just enter that in the budget section so we can see.
All right, so going over specifically what questions we will be looking for, we're going to spend a little bit of time doing a deeper dive on each question to ensure that you have the best success possible to know what we're looking for. And after we go over these 6 questions, we'll also go over our rubric. So what we will be looking for in terms of our grading or rating system. So the first question in our more open-ended question boxes that we'll have on the application is to please give a brief description of your organization's work and how your organization's values align with the purpose of this project. So knowing that we're looking through that GVRO lens, that we're looking at community awareness, as well as that engagement piece when it comes to the petitioning, so access and knowledge, what will your organization do to ensure that those particular parts of this grant are reached?
Number 2, describe the need for domestic violence victims to better understand the availability of GVROs and how to petition for one. Include data on the prevalence of gun violence during incidents of domestic violence in your targeted community. Please don't copy and paste our presentation for today into your box for number 2. We want to know what's happening in your community in specific about why this need exists. Is it a lack of internet access? Is it transportation that's causing a problem? What is that? And we want you to reach out to your local police departments and whomever might be able to provide you with statistics on gun violence in the region, the county, the city. That information does exist on gun violence and gun homicide. So include that in your question number 2.
And for number 3, describe your plan to increase public awareness of GVROs and how to petition for one through local level activities. So this is a really broad and open domain for you. So whatever you feel would represent and support the population that you're targeting the best. So if that's maybe sharing a little bit what Matthew was saying, maybe this is an internet campaign, maybe it's smaller community events, maybe it's, survivors talking to other survivors. There's lots of ways that you can be creative in increasing the public awareness, but this is a very heavily weighted question for us, since the target of the program and of this grant is to look at how to market and create this awareness campaign.
Well said. Number 4, Explain your organization's plan to evaluate the effectiveness of the state level and local outreach efforts. We know we're doing a good job because we can test it. If it's quantifiable, we can look back to see what worked, what didn't, and can we repeat that pattern again. Um, you should be able to have that plan yourself. As part of the Cal OES standard, if there is something additional that is required of you, we will let you know that upon your receipt of the grant if you're awarded that. But even without that, you should be able to want to evaluate the effectiveness. We want to see what your plan is and how to get to that point.
And number 5, what challenges might your program face during its planning or implementation, and how might you prepare to respond? So it's really important for us to be proactive when we're thinking of some of the barriers and challenges that we may face. So be honest in this one, and this is a great thing to talk about with your team, your organization. What are we going to do to help kind of dismantle some of those barriers, or at least mitigate some of those concerns?
And number 6, will your program target rural or culturally specific communities? If so, what communities will you target and what specific strategies will you use? If you do not, if your program does not focus on culturally specific groups or rural areas, that doesn't mean you're excluded from applying. But if you do focus on those communities, we want to know what strategies and vehicles are you actually using to move this material. If the work you're doing, especially like I know in the rural areas, you already know and have plans of how you're able to move things back and forth and to disseminate information to your clients. We want to know what that plan is and how do you typically engage them. We want you to use those same mechanisms here.
Well said. And we will have some time after the presentation to answer any questions. This is obviously a brand new project, so there are some questions that we may not have the complete answer to yet as we figure some things out, but we'll also have that time to be able to respond and give you as much detail that we can at this particular point. So that being said, we thought it would only be fair to let you know what the application looked like and what you'll be graded on. So for our scoring guide that I've listed here, we also have, which I will put in the chat in just a second, we do have on our website the sample of all of the questions that I just shared and our scoring guide. So we are looking at a 1 to 4 grading scale. 1 being needs improvement, 2 being average, 3 being very good, and 4 being exceptional. So we want you to obviously have a clear and strong alignment between the organization's mission and the goals of the work described in the grants application. So you will see on that rating score in that rubric what each of these points would mean along with your score. And so, like I shared, when we're done here in the question part, I will also put the link to this particular scoring guide as well as the application so that you have it.
Of course, we're all going to strive to be exceptional. That goes without saying. But in case you need to know what exceptional looks like in the definition for that, we have outlined it very clearly for you on that rubric form. Outcomes. So if we do this right, we will be able to return agency to the survivor and lift up marginalized voices. If we do this right, we can create pathways for survivors to share their experiences and testify about what they went through and how they can possibly prevent someone else from going through the same thing. We can equip survivors with information and empowerment. As we said, knowledge is power, but if they're not using it, that knowledge dies. We can encourage holistic conversations for advocates. So that way, when they're having conversations with their clients, they're just as empowered to speak with the clients about their options available to them, and they deserve that. And we can bring awareness to the homicide resulting from domestic violence. We have to talk about how many people we lose. We speak often about survivors. We even work hard to replace the language of victim with survivor. But there are people that die. And we have to acknowledge them. They were murdered and they deserve to be honored by our actions. We can bring awareness to them with this cause. Elephants in the room. We were trying to figure out how to title this slide, and we thought, well, if they're elephants, just that's the elephant in the room. Call it that. As with anything, barriers and obstacles exist. We want you to be prepared for anything that might interrupt your smooth sailing. Your organization might be fully prepared for these challenges, but it behooves us to speak to what we know stands in the face of the GVRO process now. Number one speaks to enforcement of the GVRO process. There is no process under state law for compliance review. The court is not required to report violations to law enforcement or prosecutors. It's a crime to violate the order, but no one is scheduled for regular check-ins with law enforcement and to ensure the firearms are gone or that more haven't been acquired. Studies show that 55% of firearms were actually removed in 2019, but that might speak to cost, resources, whatever that might be. Number two looks at the law enforcement's relationship to Black and Brown communities. It comes up very often that how can we expect every household to welcome the police into their home and take guns away without assuming the worst of that household? This is a very common conversation in our Black and Brown communities because of who tends to be targeted most and what those statistics say. We cannot we cannot ignore that that is going to be on the minds of some of the clients that we serve, so be aware of that. Number three speaks to the limited data on promising practices. The GVRO it's what 7 or 8 years old at this point, um, but there's still not that much information that's been tracked about this. There's been a few studies on the effectiveness of removal and retrieval processes. Of the studies that do exist, such as the California study that we cited throughout this report, processes are emphasized that demonstrate proof of concept, which is obviously helpful, especially within the realm of how many of those GVROs are tied to perpetrators of DV. That's a question we would love answered, but the qualitative support just isn't there yet, and that's an answer that we could solve through this project. And finally, GVROs should not be confused with DVROs. That goes without saying that people should know what those are. That's the point of this whole project, to ensure that misinformation stops. The DVRO does include information about firearm removal. The GVRO does not include any information about protections or stay away orders or anything that would actually protect a survivor. 95% of the GVROs that are used now are used by law enforcement. We went over the statistics earlier. We talked about how the law came about and what the difference is. But if it was meant to be used for survivors, and 95% of the use of that restraining order is not used by survivors, that means that they don't know how to reach it, or they don't know what it is, or how to make it work for them. That's a problem. Let's return the focus back to the survivor. Use your project to do that for your community.
And so we did put on here our contact information. So both of our names, our roles, as well as our email addresses. I will leave this up here for those that would like to have that information. We also put our phone numbers here. One of the things that I will make myself available to is once a week, I'll have essentially an open hour of like an office hour online. So if you have questions about the application or you need any support, that I can be there to support you in filling that out. Obviously, I'm not giving answers or giving feedback, but to be there for any kind of technical things or for you to run by any questions that you have for us and for this project.
And now for the most dangerous part of any presentation, open-ended questions from the audience. So does anyone have any questions about the program you might want to prepare or the application process itself? Doug, don't leave us in suspense. What time will, what?
The office hours.
Office hours, there we go. I see.
So one of the things that I'll do is throw out a doodle poll to our mailing list to get what everyone feels could be the best that will work for them. And then based on that feedback, I'll be able to set those out with the hope that we can start those coming in the next week. And if we need any more than the 1 hour a week, we can definitely do that. And then I see, I think Allison, your hand was up first.
I actually think Bridget was up first. So if you want to go. Oh, she's shaking her head. I just had a quick question about a couple of things, a couple of pieces of information that I didn't see in the award application that I'm just used to seeing in award applications. So one of them was you talked about having a scoring rubric, but the award application identifies that it's a non-competitive application. So I'm just trying to square those two things. If there's scoring, but it's not competitive, how those two things go together. And then I also didn't see anywhere sort of an estimated number of awards that that CPDB is expecting to make under this project.
Thank you for asking that. That speaks to how much funding we've received. There is a finite number of funds. Everyone is not allowed to request more than $100,000. So if we get I don't know, if we get 200 applications and everybody asks for $100,000, then it does become competitive and we have to look to see how do we rate and how do we expend those funds. But even if only 4 people apply and everyone gets what they asked for, we still have to be able to justify what's happening with the funding at that program. So we do want people to express everything that they can within that application. So that way we can then follow up with them and we can report accordingly back to Cal OES.
Okay, so is that to communicate that there is not a specific dollar amount that has been awarded by Cal OES, that essentially you have to go out and solicit applications and then justify the total amount to Cal OES? There's no known, you won't get more than this many dollars.
That's correct. There is a finite number for us that we can work within.
But you're not sharing that finite number with the applicants. Normally OES RFPs say there's a total amount of $4 million for this program, and no one can request more than X number of dollars per project.
Yeah, it actually is 4 million.
Oh, that was a lucky guess on my part.
That was, yeah, and I thought, well, obviously she's read the RFP, but yeah, so that's actually the where we're at. So I try not to lead with throwing you all numbers so then you think you have to compete with each other. But realistically, yes, you are correct. We do want to make sure that there's still a process in place for people, so that way they know what they're up against and why they have to submit that application to begin with. So, Allison, thank you. That brings up a number of amazing points.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
And Bridget?
We had several questions about eligible expenses. And so we have, the first one is that we have an existing legal options class where we facilitate or we help the clients fill out their restraining order requests. And so what we wanted to do was provide training to our staff who facilitate that class on the GVROs, and then be able to incorporate that in our regular legal options class. So we didn't know if there was training that was specific that you could recommend, if training our staff is an eligible cost, if staff time to facilitate the class is an eligible cost, or if this is really based on marketing to the community.
If the training for the staff results in marketing to the community, if that becomes something that they can then do, I absolutely recommend that. If it's work that you're already doing, I think that addresses question number 1. How is your work with it's a law program, a free
We call it a legal
webinar?
options class. So it's a weekly class where anybody in the community can come in and file for a DVRO. And we walk them through the process, and we provide translators if need be. We help them file it. We go with them to court to get it filed if necessary. But we don't handle, right now, we don't do anything GVRO related. And so part of it's that our staff isn't trained on it. And so we would like to train our staff, but then we would also like to incorporate that as part of our class and also part of our like message to the community about something that's available as part of our services.
That is all expendable. That all makes
Okay.
perfect sense. I'm not telling you to combine your pre-existing program with what you're wanting to do, but that's an alignment where it stands. And obviously, we can't move unless our staff is prepared to move any of this program. So that's just fine.
Okay. And then is there what's the limit, or is there a percentage that we are allocated to that we can use in the budget for marketing? Like, can only the X percent be used for marketing, or can all of it be? I mean, 100% can be more for marketing. We don't want to do that, but I'm just curious.
That would be interesting, but no, there is no amount, no percentage required,
Okay.
or max required for marketing, education, mileage, any of that. That's up to you to be expressed in your budget request.
Okay. Thank you.
Excellent point.
Thank you, Bridget. Kelly, I see your hand up as well.
Hi, yes. So my question is, and I'm sorry, I did come in late. I apologize for that. I was on another meeting. But we do TROs, electronic filing. That's what we do for our TROs for domestic violence. Is the gun violence restraining order also allowable on electric filing? Or is that something where we would have to physically take the client down there or we would have to go down there physically to the courthouse and get it filed? And I don't know if that question had been answered earlier. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're fine. That's actually a procedural question. That'd be something that you would end up teaching for your the participants of your program or for the community to be able to understand how that process works. There is an online avenue for that. There's an in-person court appearance that the client would have to show up and be a part of. With that process, that isn't done online. I guess based on the region you're in, perhaps those court appearances could be done virtually. But for the most part, those are something that they tend to show up for, and we have advocates show up and stand with the client if they don't have legal resources available to them. But yeah, all of that actually would be covered as part of what you're asking. That's something that we would hope that you would then roll out to as a lesson for your community.
Okay, so I think we're kind of mixing that up. So here's what we do, and I hear what you're saying. Yes, we already know about the court hearing, and actually, we actually tell our clients to actually do the court hearing. We're in LA, we're in South LA, so we actually tell them to actually do the court hearing online video, so that they don't have to go to court. What I'm saying is, though, we file that TRO for them in our office, so everything is done in our office. We electronically file it. We don't take the client down there to the courthouse and file it for them. We do it in our office. We do the proof of service from our office. Everything is done from our office. And that way the client doesn't get re-traumatized. They don't have to go down to the court before hearing or anything like that. Everything is done through us. What I'm asking is that the same thing with the gun violence restraining order? Is there a way that we can do it in our office and electronically file it like we do our DVROs?
Okay, Matt.
If I'm understanding correctly, so the point of this program is purely outreach.
Okay, that I got you. Okay.
Yeah, it's just how are you educating those same people coming in and they say what's a GVRO, and you'd walk them through what that even means before they fill that out. So what you do after you explain what it is and find out that it's a relevant tool for them, that's up to the process for your agency. But we just want to ensure that you're letting them know that it exists and how can they use it appropriately.
Okay, so it's not necessarily getting the gun violence restraining order for them. It's actually just doing the outreach, letting them know that it is available for them. These are the procedures of what they would have to follow. And if we choose to do it for them, we can. This is more of, let's get this out to the community that this is available.
Absolutely, that's correct. Now, if you wanted to have a fair where people come in and they fill that out, and that's part of the outreach education process, and they also need one and they can complete it at the same time, I'm not telling you to put that in your application, but that would be one way that you can combine that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Great, and I also see Aaron's hand up.
Hi. And actually, in response to Kelly's question before, whether something can be filed electronically is dependent on each county's local rules.
Yeah.
So just, heads up about that. So you kind of answered the question, but I'm going to ask it even more directly just to make sure I'm clear. So our office has a team of attorneys who, do everything from preparing the paperwork to representing clients in court. So could we, I get that the bulk of it is, outreach and education. But with outreach and education comes demand. And so, if as a result of the outreach and education, we get requests to file GVROs, could we also bill, the staff time to do that piece? Or is it only, because I heard you use the example of like a fair, and in my head that translates into like a free clinic, right? So we invite people to come learn about the GVROs, and they could also fill out the paperwork. But if like actual like individual attorney representation in a GVRO, that kind of thing, is that clearly beyond the scope of this funding? And again, part of why I ask is because with outreach comes demand, but also, if we were like, for us to do this, we would need to hire a separate human to do this because no one, has capacity. And, to only do the outreach education every day of the week probably doesn't take up all of their time, right? So they, if we hired an attorney, for example, they could also handle some cases, but I'm just trying to figure out exactly where those lines are.
The best part of what you just said is one of the obstacles that I'm sure we'll see is that when you do teach the community about what to do, and then now you have to respond to them once they come and find out they want to do that thing. So that makes perfect sense. That would be outlined in your plan, and how you would want to address that. If it would be a matter of determining how much of your time for your attorneys would be allocated to the additional increase in that demand, if it would be hiring an additional person, that'd be up to you to determine, but there's no finite amount of time or a dollar amount that could be used for that as you choose to split it up. Use it based on what makes the most sense for the skill and the work that you're already doing.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and just to expand a little bit on that, the two main focus points for this particular funding is one, being able to branch out that knowledge or increase the knowledge of your community. And then that second part is accessibility. How are you going to make it more accessible for them to use the information you just taught them on? And so I would look within that kind of realm or scope that this is how we'll increase their knowledge. And that may be one of the ways that you increase accessibility. Great. So thank you so much for questions so far. Kelly, I see your hand up. Would you like to ask your next question?
Okay, so I'm not sure who just spoke, but I'm going to go back to what that person had said to ask that question. It's not a matter of demand. It's going to be a demand. That's an absolute. If you're going to tell people about this, again, especially in my community, and yes, I do know about the electronic filing for the different counties and states and stuff like that. But I think that in looking at the overall picture with the outreach and the marketing, and just like you said, tying it in, because we do 10 restraining orders per month. That's our average is 10 per month. And with those 10, we are constantly having maybe about 20 to 30%. We're adding the gun on there. Does a person have firearms in that DVRO? So now if we're doing more outreach or more education that, hey, you can get this specifically for gun violence, then you're definitely going to get that demand and we're going to need another person. We're not legal. We are advocates. So we would have to hire somebody specifically just to do the overflow of what we do now. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Was that question for us or for Aaron in particular?
That was for you guys. That was
okay.
for the host. Okay. So
no,
so we would need to add. Yeah. So we would definitely need to add that into ours and when it comes to budget, because we can't take away from what we're doing already with all the other things that we do. We would have to have somebody specifically, not only to do outreach, but then to do the overflow that's coming in. And that is that acceptable?
That I won't say it's not acceptable, but I would say if the goal is to hire a person to cover that in particular, your plan response might be their job description and what their expectations would be.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sure. Hypothetically.
I understand. I got you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
I got you.
And just to kind of echo that and a reminder, we are looking, right, it can't be more than $100,000, and that at least as of right now, it's a 1-year grant ship, or during that time, it will be 1 year for that grant.
Yeah, and I read that and I understand about that. Again, our salary is looking at 30 to 40,000 for one person. That's what we're looking for, basic for that. So we got you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you to all of you that were able to ask those, or any comments or concerns that we want to share. Yeah, Allison.
Thank you guys for entertaining the questions as well. I know sometimes they kind of come out of left field, and so trying to hop from topic to topic can be challenging. My question kind of is around to the topic of the marketing and communicating and awareness campaigns. Given the fact that this project seems to be focusing or is focusing on awareness about to some extent about the tool knowledge of a GVRO and what the law is about a GVRO and what it does and doesn't do relative to survivors. What is the partnership's plan for ensuring that information is consistent across all the different projects? So what I'm concerned about is sort of making sure that we're sharing accurate information separate and apart from how does the information get to individual communities, because that's going to vary from community to community. But the core information about this is what a DVRO does versus a GVRO is the same across the state. So how are we going to make sure that we're not generating a bunch of small awareness campaigns that are not all saying the same thing?
I'm not saying that won't be a problem if it did happen, because your results are going to be subjective to your community, as you said. In theory, a way that we can test this is if we look to see how many gun homicides are happening when you begin this and how many are happening at the end. But we don't know what outside factors are impacting that. Is it because you taught people how to file a GVRO, or is it because suddenly guns disappeared? You know, there's no way that we can realistically ask people to use a number of homicides as your key source of evaluating your work or not. So we do realize that it's going to be subjective, and we're going to lean into that and just try to ensure that the results that we do get, we can then move to a different project that can expand on what we've discovered from that time.
And I think just to tie in a little bit of what you're asking, Allison, I think 2 ways that we're working, at least with the partnership, to include that information is consistent, is that we will have our own marketing campaign that is available to all of our grantees to be able to use to put that information out there, as well as my role as the community analyst is to work one-on-one with each organization that does get the funding to ensure that their marketing is accurate and that they're using it in a way that's going to be most accessible. So we will have our own campaign going on at the same time that will be open to all of the people who get a sub-grantee award, so that they can use that if they wish, at least the information that they may want to use, and then they can put it out into their communities however they'd like.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that it totally makes sense to me that how you communicate with an individual community is going to vary. And even, you know, as we touched on earlier, the procedures in each county or courthouse are going to be different, but the functional legal aspects of, you know, who is eligible to apply for these types of awards and what kinds of orders the court can make and why someone might pick one over the other are consistent across the state. So I just, especially because it sounds like we may have some organizations that don't have the benefit of having a lawyer to deep dive, analyze, and do the legal thinking for them. Just want to make sure we're not sharing confusing information for folks.
Part of my job is also to make sure we're not sharing confusing information to folks. So I appreciate that question, because as I said, the results that we're going to get, what you evaluate on, it's really going to be subjective to your community. And we plan on leaning into that, because how else will we be able to make the next conclusion about where to go from there? So we just want to see what we get.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Amber.
Hi, I just wanted, I think that it was a little bit answered in the last question, but is there going to be like general training that comes once you are granted the award? Just particularly because I'm thinking we're a small team, and so our team does a lot, and so making sure that our entire team is like properly trained on the GVRO is a big part of it. And I know that you're going to be there to support, but I'm just wondering what it's going to look like at the start.
And that was Emily.
Oh, yeah, sorry. There's two people in here. Hi, I'm Emily.
So we'll have trainings on both fronts, on the administrative side as well as the programmatic point. So how you're able to move through that, what's reporting, what your finance person might want to keep track of, and what those numbers might look like. And then also the actual program side of what this means, so that way you can then apply the information to your campaign. So we want to offer as much information for that in the beginning as possible. So short answer, yes, we will have those things for you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Was
just
that Amber?
Yes.
Matthew's great about listening for voices and cadences. So, and another thing to add to that, one thing Matthew and I are both excited about offering as well to anyone in this room, as well as other people that will be applying, our monthly informational sessions. Some of those may be things like how to get over some of the barriers that you bring up in your application. It could be specific things. So to go back to your point, Amber, about how we're able to get this information and general kind of knowledge around GVROs, language, all of that. So we will be putting that together and sending that out as well once we get all of the grants to everyone, and that we have more of a clear understanding at who's at the table with this particular project. All right, any other questions, comments, concerns before we adjourn for today? All right, well, the great ones to bring up. Another thing Matthew and I will be doing is kind of a frequently asked questions. Based on what you're sharing here today, we'll put some of those questions and answers up there. So if you missed part of it, or somebody has a question at your organization, you can always go back to our website and see those frequently asked questions. I know that both Matthew and I are very excited to get this going, and we're looking forward to helping you navigate through and learning from each of your organizations as well on ways that we can do this work better. And there's a question here about the email recording to get to you directly. I know we're going to put the recording on our website. I'm not sure, Matthew, if we planned on sending it out to everyone who participated.
We can send the link once it's on the web. Once it's online, we can send everyone the link of how to access it.
Great question, Leah. Any other questions, comments?
I'm excited to see these. We know it's a broad ask, and a different one. And for the work that you're already doing, we just look forward to seeing how you're able to align that and to implement it. So thank you for even caring enough to lean into this, and we look forward to seeing what you have to submit.
All right, have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.